Welcome to the Enrichment Today Podcast, hosted by Dr. Amy Blansit and the Drew Lewis Foundation. This podcast covers topics to improve stability and find tranquility in your life. Join us as we discuss topics to improve your financial health, change your limiting beliefs, increase your wellness, and so much more. If you like Enrichment Today, make sure to follow the Drew Lewis Foundation and Enrichment Today on social media. Now sit back, relax, and learn to break some crayons with us.
Welcome back to our podcast. I'm Dr. Amy Blansit. We thank you for joining us on Enrichment Today. I'm excited for our guest. She is serving the Child Advocacy Center here in Springfield. Kat, thank you for joining us. I'm going to give you a moment just to talk about what your role is with the Child Advocacy Center and maybe some of your history with the company.
Sure. Thanks so much, Amy, for having us. So I've been the executive director at the center for a little over a year and a half. So I'm brand new to Springfield as well, but coming back into an organization that serves children the way we do has been a very intentional career choice that I made, and had the blessing of inheriting an incredible team of professionals. And so we're working together to support children who are a part of an abuse and neglect investigation. And what we really do is make sure that they have a safe space where they can come and share what they've experienced or witnessed.
Wonderful. So you're new to the community. Where are you from?
So that's kind of a long story. Most recently, we relocated from Southern California, but my family had been in Arkansas before that, down in Conway, and I was actually born and raised in Australia.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so a little bit of
global
everywhere.
experience, but also some Midwest experience.
Very much so, yes.
Wonderful. So your time with the Child Advocacy Center in the life of it is actually quite small. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the Child Advocacy Center and what you do, but you guys have been around for a while, so we'll get to that as well.
Sure.
So when I was researching, what do I want to really share with the community about what your organization does? On your website, I love just the simple statement that you focus on giving a voice to children. So first, let's talk about maybe greater. What is your mission and focus? And how do you guys really work to serve giving that voice to the children in our community?
Sure. So giving the voice is really the heart and soul of the mission. When we're talking about a kiddo who's a part of an ongoing investigation for abuse or neglect, we have to really understand what that means for that kiddo and how they share about what they've experienced. Those are incredibly sensitive, difficult conversations to have, especially because 90% of the time, the source of the abuse is someone they know, love, or trust.
Right.
And so we like to think that kids are really open, and when things are going wrong, they're going to come tell us. But it's really the complete opposite. There's so much fear and shame and guilt that comes into play, and so they shut down. And so what we're really there to do is create that space and environment that allows them to feel safe, that allows them to share their experience. And it becomes a critical part of the investigation because, unfortunately, there's very rarely a witness to abuse or neglect.
Right.
And so being able to get that child appropriate safety interventions, healing interventions, they have to be able to share what they've experienced. And so giving them that voice is really everything that we're trying to do for them.
So you've been talking about children and the individuals you serve, but more specifically, what is the demographic that the center serves?
So we're going to serve anyone up to 18 years of age. We have 14 counties across southern Missouri that we're serving. So we have a center located here in Springfield, and so Greene County is our largest referring source. But we also have a center out in West Plains, and we're pretty much serving every county in between here and there.
Wonderful. Unfortunately, wonderful that you have that amount of service, but also tragic that we need it. So before we get into kind of the why you exist, how do people refer someone to your organization?
Sure, there's two kind of parts to it. For those direct services, especially around our forensic interview work and our forensic medical exams that take place on the center, those are referrals through our investigative partners. So that's Children's Division, Law Enforcement, Juvenile Office. But our advocacy services have a broader reach. We recognize that for parents and non-offending caregivers, when you start to have concerns that your child may be victimized or you're unsure what to do, you need that outreach point on, this is what I'm seeing, what do I do, how do I get help? And so our advocates are going to help support those crisis calls and help guide non-offending caregivers into making those hotlines or police reports so that formal investigative process can start and we can get the kiddo and that family in for those other services.
So you mentioned hotline. I've witnessed a few things where I was concerned as a parent who parents differently than another parent, but to a greater degree of just parenting styles. And even though I've even been through some training in the kind of mandatory reporting, there's still always this component of, am I creating a call that's going to disrupt someone else's life when there really isn't a concern there? And am I making a situation worse? And so there's all these things that we feel when we recognize something might be off. So is your center a place that if we have listeners who are witnessing things that they're uncomfortable with, maybe something they're seeing in someone at church or someone, even a neighbor, are you a place that if I'm confused about whether or not it's something I should call, that I can voice it through your organization?
So we would be happy to take that call and help provide guidance on whether it is something that may be rising to that level of concern that a report should be made or not. And that particularly becomes important when we've got concerns that are in that area between poverty and neglect. Because what we don't want to do is subject a family into this investigative standpoint. And that's where we have to kind of check our own personal biases and lenses. On the other side of the spectrum, we want to make sure that children are being protected. And some of that, a great analogy that actually our training and education director uses, which I think really helps navigate that position, is the system is set up, the CAC and the services we provide are set up to help explore if there is a concern for that child and their safety and well-being. And so similarly, when a teacher may have a concern that a child in their classroom has dyslexia, the teacher isn't making that determination, this child has dyslexia. They're going to refer for some assessment and support to make a determination on what services this child may need. Because what we can sometimes find when we kind of take that back to the abuse and neglect scenario, one of the biggest preventions in being able to reduce child abuse is that dynamic of it's inside the family and it's private and I don't want to overstep.
Yes.
And so we want to try to navigate through what is really a really complicated decision point.
Right, absolutely. And you bring up so many great points, especially when we're looking at, we know poverty rates are increasing. And as we begin to see a neighbor struggle or, someone that we don't have a relationship with, they may parent differently than we do. They have different resources. They have different social capital. They have different connections. And where you and I may say, well, I would have done that differently, we come from a point of, I have the resources to make that choice. And just because someone's in poverty doesn't always rarely means, right, that it's actually neglect. Right. It's unfortunate, and we wish that person had those resources. And so understanding that comes from a point of education, and it comes from a point of reaching out, getting involved in community organizations like yours. Go volunteer. If you're questioning, the way that another system works, you have to educate yourself about that system to better understand. So over the last 30 years, right, your organization has been in play for almost 30 years. You've only been there a year and a half, but it sounds like you've been passionate about this topic. Do you know, in this area, really, what have the last 3 decades looked like? How has your organization had to change as our community has changed?
Sure. So I think the biggest part is the Child Advocacy Center has continued to expand its capacity to meet the demand. And one of the things that's really fascinating, it was really interesting for me to learn as I transitioned into this role, was that Greene County and the general area we serve has some of the highest rates of reports of child abuse and neglect in the state. We see more children at the CAC than our partner centers in the metro area see on an annual basis. And so the success of what the center has done over time is really evidenced by that number. And initially that sounds backwards, how could that be? But it's because of the community awareness that the center has raised around the issues of child abuse and neglect. So there is an opening to, I see this, it doesn't look right, let me make a report. And then it's the work that our center has done with those multidisciplinary team partners. So our law enforcement and our children's division and our juvenile officers across all of those counties, because we're working together to make the investigative process the least invasive we can for the child, the most supportive for their caregivers. And so when you see the capacity of what we've been able to build, it's not necessarily that child abuse is more prominent in Southern Missouri. We just have a much stronger community response to it.
Right. And so that advocacy piece, right? And you guys have a really simple saying on the website that's see something, say something.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's important too, as I mentioned, when you see something happening in someone else's private life, it's difficult to feel or to get involved. But having those different resources to know this is what I saw, it makes me uncomfortable. Is this really, neglect and abuse, or is it just the unfortunate sides that do occur in poverty? So the fact that you guys have increased awareness, been able to serve more, it's kind of like that idea of service calls, even in a neighborhood, when we begin Neighborhood Watch, when we get individuals in a community that are willing to say, this traffic and on my street like this is not what I want. Service calls go up and it makes the neighborhood look worse. But really, it's that voice of a community coming together to say, hey, this isn't okay. I'm finally going to be engaged. And that engagement piece is so important when we're talking about if you don't say anything, right, what then happens? How many more years go by? And we also know that, unfortunately, there's that repeat. So if we're not stopping the neglect, the likeliness for it to continue in the next generation is also very high.
Yeah, and that's being able to break that cycle is a really key part to long-term prevention and reduction.
Absolutely. So this topic's very important to me. I'm very passionate about it. I grew up, my parents were foster parents for 40 years. They served, almost 250 kids in 2 different states. And so it's very much a part of my life to see kids who really were in areas that it truly was neglect and abuse, and to have, those be my siblings and to cycle through that. And so knowing what you offer and that there's that service for those children, because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I was growing up, they definitely had resources. I remember taking them to Dr. Lutz, who was amazing, but it, was very much, it was not in the environment that you guys provide. You had teddy bears donated, and so the kids, receive that amazing experience. So can you tell us a little bit about when a child does work with your center, maybe what is that experience like for them? How do you create that safe, trusting space?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways we're going about that. The first is the physical environment. If driving down Walnut Street and you see our little house, it's creating that outset environment that doesn't feel like an institution.
Yeah, it's a sweet little cottage.
Yeah, and it's a really big part of the Child Advocacy Center movement before the movement got going nationally. When these children need to be interviewed and asked these questions, they're taken sometimes to a police station. Yeah. Well, we teach our kids, police come get the bad guy. So if you're showing up to a police station with an 8-year-old, they think they're in trouble, they think they did something wrong, and all of that reinforces all of the manipulation and grooming that's gone into don't talk about what happened to you. Yes. Or it's, government offices, or worst case scenario, we had too many times where children are being asked about the incident that they have sustained in the home where it's happened. Right. And so a kid's not going to talk about the sexual abuse that they've sustained in the room where it happened, with most likely the perpetrator sitting in the next room or on the couch beside them. So it's really about getting them into that neutral environment and then making sure that environment really addresses what helps make a child comfortable. So there's a lot of murals and bright colors and toys, and we've been able to expand our service area. So we have one area that's more appropriate for our older kids, so it's less toy generated and a little more just neutral and warm and inviting. And then it's really about the staff and the services that we provide. We're incredibly picky about who we bring into our team, and incredibly focused on training them to be able to meet each kid and each family exactly where they're at, because they're all a little bit different. And really what we're able to do then also is be consistent. There's so much turnover in our partner agencies that you don't have time to become a seasoned investigator in this division because you're moving on to something else. And so the CAC and our staff are really able to provide that consistency, that professionalism, and then that depth of knowledge that knows how to create that safe space for each kid.
That's wonderful. So how many staff do you guys have?
So between both centers, we have 36 full-time employees. So we have 6 who are down in our West Plains location, and the rest work out of our Springfield location. About 8 of those are administrative and development personnel. All the rest are direct services. So that's split between our child and family advocates, our forensic interviewers, and then our medical personnel who oversee our forensic medical exams.
Wow, that's amazing. It's quite the staff.
It is. It's grown tremendously in the last couple of years. And what we really wanted to make sure is, as we're seeing an increased need for services, we're not really in a place where we can create a wait list. A child who's in the middle of an abuse investigation, and when there are real safety concerns, we can't say we'll get to you when we have time. We just have to keep coming to work and keep making that space available. And we did have some lag time. A year or two ago, we had an average 9-day wait time from referral to appointment. We've been able to cut that to 5. And then we're always holding space each day for those same day, more emergent cases where there's an immediate safety threat or an immediate forensic need that we're going to respond immediately and create space for that child to be able to come in.
Oh, that's amazing. What a commitment from your staff. It's such important work. So what can the community do to support you? 33 staff, right? Was it 33?
Yes,
36? 36?
Yes.
36 staff.
Yes.
I don't want to cut you short, right?
No,
we need
you.
more staff.
Yes.
So you're 36 staff, spreading across much of Missouri, especially southern Missouri. When I say community, I'm not talking about Springfield, but in the greater sense, in the nonprofit world, right? We have to operate. We still have money is always a need, so you can address that. But we really think about just in general, what is it your agency is needing support from the community in all the different ways? What can we do? What can we help share with our listeners that can really help them serve your group?
Sure. So yes, of course, there's, the nonprofit endless quest for funding to support programs and services. Everything we provide is offered at no cost to the child or family. Mm-hmm. And so we are looking constantly to make sure that we're able to operate not just bare minimum, but to provide high quality services for our kiddos and families. But for the greater community need, and it kind of comes back to that cycle of abuse and prevention. I would love for us not to have to exist, or not to have to exist at the scale that we do currently. And so that's really about breaking those cycles of abuse, having really honest conversations with our kids around prevention. And that's where I want our community more than anything to really get engaged. I want every parent. I remember going through some of this training when I was pregnant with my first child, and everything I learned in becoming a CASA advocate at that point in time about this whole environment blew my mind, because none of it's in the what to expect when you're expecting handbook.
No, it's not.
Right? And there's so many really easy conversations we can have with our kiddos from a really early age on that help them become empowered and help break these cycles, especially when we're talking about physical and sexual abuse and even neglect. Too many times kiddos are growing up in those environments not knowing that what's being done to them isn't appropriate because it's all they've known.
Right.
So I really want to encourage our community to get engaged as a prevention standpoint. And so conversations with your kids, and that starts early on and continues as they get older. Be really comfortable in asking questions about how your kids are going to be protected in any youth serving organization you drop them off at. Be that your church Sunday school or a sports program, a dance team, whatever it is. We have to be comfortable asking those providers of services, what are your policies around protecting my child? Do you have policies that mandate all of your staff to have observable and interruptible time with your child, that they can never be alone in a one-on-one setting? Are they constantly doing background checks and annual trainings on preventing abuse and awareness? Because all of those things are going to keep those perpetrators away from those environments.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of times when individuals hear about child abuse and neglect, we immediately have an image in our head that, and it's frustrating that this is what that image is, but it's a low-income family that probably has had generational abuse, there is neglect, abuse, and we just have this image that we form in our brain that makes it something different, right? And we forget that it is coaches. It is, unfortunately, it is becoming more and more, we're seeing this so often in the news, that it is a trusted coach, that it is a trusted youth pastor, that it is a trusted teacher, or, someone, and unfortunately, the person who's the groomer, they do put out that onus of trust, and they do work to create that. And so that idea of creating those conversations, we have to accept, unfortunately, that it exists, and we have to have those difficult conversations with our kids. I remember parenting and being like, oh, this conversation feels so uncomfortable, which then I knew it was a conversation that had to be had.
Yes.
Like, if this makes me feel awkward, then I know that my child feels uncomfortable having this conversation in public, because as an adult, I should know better. I should be able to lead it. And so I love that one of your answers to what can we do, we have to have those conversations. Yeah. We have to challenge individuals, and we have to change what this idea is, that we almost protect ourselves and abuse only looks like this. But we have to be aware.
Yeah, we're either kind of looking at those low-income families, or it's the stranger danger mentality. Yes. It's the creepy person in the trench coat at the park, or the white van that's trying to lure your kid into the car with kittens and candy.
It's so rare.
And so we've done a fabulous job in the last 20 to 30 years teaching our kids about all of that.
Yes.
We haven't done anywhere near a good enough job on teaching them what to do when the danger is someone they know.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes someone they love.
Very oftentimes someone they love. And so, some of the things that are really simple tools for parents, body names, and that all of our body parts have appropriate names, and that penis and vagina are not bad words, is where we start. So when they're little and we're teaching ears, nose, elbow, teach all the other parts, because it becomes so important if ever there is a disclosure they need to make.
Yes.
Too often disclosures get missed because we've called it some cute fuzzy name, and the adult receiving that information can't make the connection that when the kiddo is talking about grandpa coming and petting their bunny, that's not a pet rabbit they have in their home.
Right.
And so if we can start really early, the other one around that is body autonomy. No one touches you unless you make it okay. And that's everybody.
Yes.
It's not grandma who you haven't seen for 6 months and I'm going to make you give her a hug, because we've given our kid now a confusing message. Mm-hmm. Wait, I'm in charge of my body, but now at this moment, I don't really want to hug grandma because I don't really know her. She kind of feels like a stranger and she might be a little bit smelly, but now I'm being forced to hug her. We're setting them up with so many confusing things, where if it's really as simple as your body all of the time, then it's really clear boundaries for those kids. In the same way, I have a very vocal 9-year-old who, we talk about putting seatbelts on every time we get in the car, and she's the first person to call you out if you don't have your seatbelt on. And I really equate it to that same mentality. If from a very early age, they understand and they expect the norm is nobody touches me without my permission, then the first time somebody tries, I think they're far more likely to call it out and say, whoa, dude, stop touching me. And right there, we've made a major leap forward in prevention.
Yeah, those are such great points. So if someone's interested in helping support my last question was, how do we put you out of business, right? Yes. How do we make sure that we have fewer kids that are experiencing abuse and neglect? So where can individuals get these resources? I want to be a better parent and have better conversation. I want to teach my child, these words and language, the seatbelt concept, right? These are your truths that you hold to. Where can individuals go in order to be a better parent, a better community member, a better preventive, measurement taker?
Yes. So there are a number of resources. Our education and prevention department we will show up anywhere to any group of people who want to learn or have these conversations, be that a small group of your friends in your home, because that's how you feel comfortable. We have stewards of children training that we offer community-wide on a regular basis that can be an introductory level into some of those things. There are also other resources off our website, childadvocacycenter.org, that link to some national organizations that have some really rich and robust talking points across different ages, and just guides and information for parents looking on how to have those conversations.
Wonderful. Was there anything else you wanted to share today that I didn't ask that's a part of that mission, vision, and the work that your organization does?
I think I always just want to brag on our community and our support and our staff. We do very difficult work a lot of the time. Most of the time we're seeing kind of the absolute worst of humanity.
Yes.
But we also, for me, I find a way through that because I think we also have the honor of getting to see the best. Mm-hmm. Because when you see that caregiver who's so overwhelmed about the idea of having to navigate this process once they've become aware that something may be happening to their child, or you see that kiddo who is just carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders because they have this big, awful thing inside that they need to share, and getting to see them have that moment, feel safe enough to share. You see the beginning of recovery and healing and resiliency building. And that's a pretty wonderful thing to get to see on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's amazing. Focusing on that, solution based and being able to see that and knowing you do have very heavy work. And I'm sure your staff, you have a great team and dynamic, because you do have to celebrate those moments where you know that your work matters and that you may not even see, you might see that healing in this short moment, but to know what you guys do is long-term in the life of that child and potentially changing a cycle for the next generation. The work that you guys do is so important. Having our community support you, having partnerships like the Child Advocacy Center come and work with the Drew Lewis Foundation, the families we serve that also often are in crisis, and they have that bandwidth is short because they are dealing with so much. Giving them new methods and opportunities to educate and communicate with their children in a preventive measure is so important as well. So just a reminder to our community that the component of prevention is there. You don't have to wait until an instance has occurred, that the Child Advocacy Center has all kinds of resources, materials, and ways that you personally can get involved so that we can one day, I hate to say this to the 36 amazing staff,
yes,
but wouldn't it be an amazing day if we could put you out of business through prevention, community, and really coming together to change the dynamics for our children. I mean, they are our future, and we've got to do the work today in order to make them thriving, individuals in the future. So,
yes.
Well, Kat, thank you so much for what you guys do, for representing an amazing staff and the work that they provide for our community. And we want to thank our listeners for giving you the chance to share that as well. So one last time, you had mentioned Child Advocacy Center.org.
Yes.
And what are other ways, what's the best phone number or other method for our community to connect?
Sure. So the main phone number is 417-831-2327. You can also look at a number of our social media postings, Facebook, Instagram, the whole list. We're often putting out not just updates about what's going on in the center, but also some of those teaching tips, education snippets, how to begin those conversations.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Listeners on Enrichment Today, we appreciate your time as well, and we look forward to having you on our next episode. I'm Dr. Amy Blansit. Have a great day.